Essential question 5 is, what were the final steps on the road to secession? Southerners, after the election of 1860, feared rule by a northern sectional party, the Republicans, who they saw as hostile to their values and their interests. And although the Republican Party was not an abolitionist party as of the election of 1860, many Southerners believed that they would eventually demand abolition, meaning that, again, they feared rule by this sectional party that represented only the interests of the North and would not represent Southern interests, particularly slavery. After the election of 1860, when Lincoln is elected president, 7 Southern states seceded or left the Union. They were led by South Carolina, shock surprise after the nullification crisis back in Jackson's administration. But other states that seceded were Mississippi, Florida, Alabama, Georgia, Louisiana, and Texas. And these original 7 states will become the Confederate States of the America, which will also be known as the Confederacy, and I may use those two terms interchangeably. And these initial seceding states were ones in which cotton and slavery was most important. And you can see from the map here that there will be 4 other states that will secede and join the Confederacy later on when the war actually breaks out, and that'll be Virginia, North Carolina, Tennessee, and Arkansas. You'll also have, interestingly, 4 slave states, Delaware, Maryland, Kentucky, and Missouri, that will actually stay with the Union. And this is important because it challenged the argument that secession was necessary to preserve slavery. Because we'll see this later on in the next chapter, but it's important to understand that Delaware, Maryland, Kentucky, and Missouri all were allowed to remain slave states even after the Civil War had broken out. Now, after this secession has happened, these are 7 original states, the president at the time, who was still awaiting Lincoln to be sworn in, was James Buchanan, and in his remaining days in office, he didn't do anything. He failed to act on this issue of succession, essentially leaving the decision about what to do to Abraham Lincoln when he took office. And when Lincoln did take office, he had to settle this issue, but he was reluctant to go to war, although he did believe in the preservation of the Union. And what he does is something actually that's rather clever. He positions the Union in such a way to make the Confederacy have to make the first move. So he was reluctant to go to war, but he wanted to preserve the Union, and the way that he tries to do this is by vowing to hold on to federal property in the South. Places like post offices, military forts, naval bases, those things that were administered by the federal government. And this is going to force the South to initiate the war, because obviously the Confederacy could not tolerate things like Union forts in their so-called new nation. And this is going to result in what's recognized as the first battle of the Civil War, which is the Battle of Fort Sumter in 1861. This was a federal fort in Confederate territory, and the Confederacy fired on this fort before it could be replenished with supplies from the Union, which were on their way. At this point, after the South had essentially initiated the war by attacking Fort Sumter, Lincoln called for troops to suppress the Southern insurrection, and then you have, after Lincoln has called out troops, 4 more Southern states seceded to join the Confederacy. And again, this is considered the beginning of the Civil War. And you'll notice that at this point, when the war begins, it's not yet about slavery. It's about preserving the Union. It's about quashing Southern insurrection. It's not about abolishing slavery. It will eventually be a war about that. And certainly the causes of the war are deeply rooted in the debate over slavery, but the initial fighting itself begins over preserving the Union. And that was Lincoln's original intent, not to abolish slavery. Although, as we'll see in the next chapter, that will become his intent, and it will very much change the nature of what the Civil War is about.